Welcome once again. We are sketching another square root graph here. Let's begin by just writing down what we need to find first. I need to figure out what my endpoint is going to be. I need to figure out what my x-intercept is going to be, which occurs when y is equal to 0. And I need to figure out what my y-intercept is going to be, which occurs when x is equal to 0. Let's begin by figuring out what my endpoint is going to be. And remember, this is quite an ugly thing underneath my square root graph here. So figuring out what the endpoint is going to be a little tricky. Remember from our previous part, there are two ways of figuring out what the endpoint is going to be. The first way is to factorize. So if I write this out again, so as y is equal to negative, then I've got my square root plus 2. I'm going to take out whatever is in front of my x. So in that case, I'm going to take out 2 from this. Now, if I take out 2, this 3 becomes 3 on 2, and this x just becomes plus x. Remember, another way to write this, just a way that we're probably more comfortable with, is writing it as 2x plus 3 on 2 plus 2. And then once looking at it like this, we can figure out what the endpoint is going to be. The endpoint is going to be just negative 3 on 2, and then 2 here. Because remember, the y value of your endpoint is just the vertical translation. And just like that, we have figured out what the endpoint is going to be. So remember, you first have to factorize it. Then once you've factorized it, you take the opposite sign of what's under here. There is another way to do this, and actually this is my preferred way of doing it, and that is just take whatever is underneath the square root, so in this case 3 plus 2x, set it equal to 0, and then solve for x. So in this case, I would end up with 2x is equal to negative 3, then x is equal to negative 3 on 2. And just like that, I figured out what the x value is going to be. So it's kind of pick your poison as which one you like better there. But either way is good. Just make sure you're getting the right answer. All right, we continue on now. I'm now going to figure out what my x-intercept is going to be, which occurs when y is equal to 0. So I'm going to write out this like that. 3 plus 2x plus 2. I first need to get rid of this 2 here. So I'm going to minus 2 to both sides. 3 plus 2x. I then have to get rid of the negative, so I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1 to get rid of the negative. A negative and a negative make a positive, so this is going to be 2, the square root of 3 plus 2x. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to square both sides. So that's going to leave me with 2 squared is 4 is equal to 3 plus 2x. Then I'm going to minus 3 to both sides. So that's going to leave me with 1 is equal to 2x. And then the last thing I'm going to do is divide both sides by 2, which is going to leave me with 1 on 2 is equal to x, which is just x is equal to a half. So I have found my endpoint. Fantastic. I have found my x-intercept. Fantastic. The next thing that I need to find is my y-intercept. So let's come up over here and go y is equal to negative the square root. Actually, I might need a bit more space here. 3 plus 2, 0, plus 2. Then that just goes to 0, so it's just going to be this plus 2. And you know what? That's as good as it gets. So that is what we're going to leave it as, because we don't want to do what the square root of 3 is, because we'd end up with a decimal. So there it is right there. Perfect. And I might just move this down a little bit, just so when I'm sketching it, I can see it. So let's just move this all the way down. Now they're all lined up. Okay. Let's now get to sketching this thing. Again, let's just remind ourselves of the rule that we're dealing with. We've got y is equal to negative the square root of 3 plus 2x plus 2. Okay, let's again just think of all the transformations that are occurring here. So we're starting with something that looks like this, and then I've got a negative out the front, and that negative out the front causes a reflection in my x-axis. Then it's moving 2 up, so it's going to look like this, and I have an endpoint at negative 3, 2, and 2, so that means it's moving over here. So it's going to look something like that. All right, so now that I've kind of visualizing what it's going to look like, let's just put in all our important information here. So the first thing I'd put in is that my endpoint is occurring here. So at negative 3, 2, so that would be like there and there. So negative 3, 2, 2. I then have a y-intercept at negative the square root of 3 plus 2. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, is this here or here? Is it positive or is it negative? And hopefully you can think about it for a bit and realize, well, if the square root of 4 is 2, then the square root of 3 must be less than that. And if this is a negative and I'm plussing 2 to it, it must be positive. So just kind of thinking it through logically is one great way to do it. Another way to do it is if you're struggling to figure out whether something is positive or negative, look at your other coordinate. So this is x is equal to a half. Well, that's positive, isn't it? So that means it's over here. So let me draw that in. It's going to be, where will I do it? A half, 0. And then you can ask yourself, is there any way for me to draw a square root graph in which it's negative and then goes through there? Well, no, that just doesn't work, does it? It has to be positive. And then remember, that's what we said if we thought about this logically as well. So that means my graph has to look like this. Let's see if I can draw that a bit nicer. That's pretty good. Try to draw your graphs as nicely as possible. And remember, it has to have that square root shape to it. So I've got 1 half 0 here. And then this point is 0, negative, let me get rid of this, the square root of 3 plus 2. And there we go. So we have labeled my x-intercept, we've labeled my y-intercept, and we've labeled the endpoint, just like that. Hopefully you found this useful and you have a good understanding of the square root graphs. You should now begin your exercise on this topic, which is exercise 4C. All right, make sure to reach out if you have any questions, and I'll see you soon.